Hello. I am so excited to talk to you all today. Thank you for having me. My name is Kelly Wright. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan in linguistics. I work on institutionalized racism and language. My previous work has been on the neural basis of racism, looking at how people perceive faces of color and how that changes the words that they use to label them. I've also looked at textual racialization, about how a word over time takes on a racialized meaning. And recently, I replicated the infamous SPA housing study, looking at how speakers of different dialects fare in the modern housing market. But today, I want to talk to you about something else that I do that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is historical sociolinguistics. So I am a founding member of the North American Research Network in Historical Sociolinguistics, NARNIS. We are an LSA sister society. And I want to talk to you about one question in that vein that's really interesting to me, and that is, how does a bad word become bad? So profanity, like any other lexical category, has this direct connection to our emotional experience. We perceive profanity differently. It's processed in a different place in the brain. We have measurable physiological responses when we hear and use profanity. But what's really interesting to me is that we acquire profanity later in life, much later in life than other language, between the ages of 12 and 16. And this is a time when we are also developing this independent sense of self, becoming situated in our own identities. And so it's very interesting that we each sort of individually decide which bad words are bad, which ones we want to use, which ones we don't want to use. And we make those decisions based on these social consequences or affordances that these words give us. So we know that you might say something like, this is really shitty with your friends, but not with your boss. It's totally fine with your friends, but weird with your boss. Or maybe not weird with your boss if you're friends with your boss, right? So there's this reason that adopting profanity into our idiolects works in this way is because bad words, especially slurs, are ideology cues. So we know that slurs are ideology cues because of two phenomenon that we can observe by digging into lexical histories, by doing historical sociolinguistics. So one phenomenon is that slurs haven't migrated away from their original sources like other lexical items do. So keeping the profanity theme, we can look at cock, for example. So at the end of the Enlightenment, beginning of the Victorian period, cock just meant male chicken, and then it started to also mean male genitalia. And so we invented a whole new word, rooster, to replace that tamer meaning. But cock for male genitalia is now also used to mean other things, right? It could mean that someone's an asshole, or that you've messed up something, like to cock up, right? We can also look at the word fuck, of course, the perennial example. It certainly doesn't only have the meaning of penetrative intercourse anymore, right? It has up to 811 defined meanings for that word, right? So it's very flexible. It's absolutely migrated away from its sources. But when we look at a word like the N word, that has had a single stable meaning for 400 years. And that is because the ideology that it cues has also remained stable for 400 years, right? And this phenomenon is called accretion. Or another related phenomenon to this stable ideology, right, is called accretion. So when we look at a word like retarded, that word, when I was growing up, was a medical term, right? It was definitional for anyone who wasn't neurotypical. And in the 90s, when the politically correct movement sort of arose, we get this term mentally challenged, right, in place of that. But we don't use mentally challenged that much anymore, right? It's certainly not the neutral term it started out being. And the reason for this is because of accretion. So we think of like a black hole, right? It's something that is this large void, this ideology that pulls sort of lexical material around it, right? Mentally challenged isn't neutral anymore because the ideologies that we carry about disability and deficiency have remained stable. We can put as many neutral terms as we want into that space, and they're going to, over time, become negative because there's a negative ideology at the center that's pulling all this lexical material towards it, right? So looking at profanity in these ways really makes plain the relationship between ideological change and language change. So when we think about the prevailing ideologies of our time, right, Aristotelian logic, capitalist and consumerist narratives, individuality and exceptionality, structural racism, all of these things define for us, even long before we were born, the pool of available lexical material that we have to work with. And what's very interesting is that we then reach into that pool to use material to define our relationships with our own bodies, right? So these ideologies control how we label ourselves, right? How we craft our identities and move through the world. And so historical sociolinguistics really helps us to sort of understand how we navigate the now by looking at ways that we've navigated language use in the past. So thank you for taking this journey with me. If you want to learn more about slurs, there's an hour-long lecture on my website, as well as other talks I've given about structural racism and the other work I've done. Thank you so much for your interest, and be well.